Radical questioning is where we ask ourselves the radical question. The radical question is, am I the original of who I am? Or am I an infinitely inferior, mind-created version or analog or copy of that? So naturally, that's a good question. Not only is it the radical question, it's a very good question as well. It's very fruitful. We can compare this to the type of questioning that goes on in cognitive behavioral therapy, just to give one example, and all rational therapists are the same in this regard. And so, supposing I'm having a particular thought that everyone in the room hates me. Which is a thought we might have had before. It's a thought I'm sure I've had before. So then CBT invites us to challenge, in inverted commas, that thought. And so, well, maybe I'm distorting things. Maybe not everyone in the room hates me. Maybe a few do. Maybe that fellow over there does. He certainly doesn't look like he likes me very much. But not everybody. Some of them probably think I'm okay. Some of them might even think I'm a nice guy. So the questioning is the thought a realistic one or not? And then when we objectively examine the thought, maybe we can put it in better perspective and say, hey, do you know what? That's not a very realistic thought. It's a kind of a way out there thought. So that's trivial questioning. And it's not to say there's never a place for trivial questioning. I mean, we question ourselves and in that trivial way the whole time. So radical questioning would be, although it's not part of the arsenal of CBT or any other rational therapy, but radical questioning would be, does the one who's having this thought exist or not? That's a pretty radical thought. Too radical, really, for it to occur, really, generally, in the usual run of things. Or the radical questioning could be, is the one who is having this thought the true original of who I am, or is it an infinitely degraded spin-off version? Kind of an echo of an echo of an echo of a reverberation of a rumour of a poor copy sort of thing, etc., etc., etc. So that's a very good question. It's a very good question because straight away it stops me taking the thought that I'm having about everybody hates me, or I'm a useless person, or everything's going to be terrible, or whatever it is. It stops me taking that thought so seriously. So the two possible reformulations of the thought, everyone in the room hates me, maybe one or two do, but not all of them. Or maybe no one hates me. Maybe they can't be bothered to hate me because they don't care enough. All of those thoughts become instantly and absolutely meaningless when seen in the light of radical questioning. If the one who is who is thinking the thought doesn't actually exist, or rather only exists as a kind of figment of the imagination, then the possibilities of the possibility of everyone hates me, not everyone hates me, so what? It doesn't matter anymore, does it? It's like a joke at that point. And this isn't to say that I've answered the radical question, because it's not the sort of question you can just slap an easy answer on. But the very fact that I'm asking it and see it as being meaningful to ask relativizes the thoughts that I'm having on the basis of this self, which is now open to questioning. So I'm not trashing the self, completely forgetting about it. I'm relativizing it. Relativizing it means it could possibly be the case, but maybe not, and we don't know. And that not knowing is what relativizes everything. When I know for a fact, in inverted commas, when I know absolutely beyond any question, I just know in this really heavy, concrete way that I am this self, then there's no possibility of relativization. And all my conceptions and thoughts are equally banal, if only I could see it, because they're all only ever the same thing. If I have the thought everything's going to be great and I get euphoric, everything's going to be shit and I get dysphoric, neither of them make any difference, because both of those thoughts are the assumed concrete self. Both of those thoughts equal that self. They equally equal it. Both are meaningless without it, so both are it. So no matter what I think, and we might say that there's a whole range of thoughts that I could have, a big palette of thoughts, a big sack full of possible thoughts that I can pull out thoughts from. They're not as diverse as I think, though. They're all the same thought, over and over and over and over again. They're the same banal thought, because all my thoughts, all the thoughts that I have on the basis of the assumed self, are that assumed self. Just because I'm assuming that self and I'm not being aware that I'm assuming it, doesn't mean that the thoughts aren't the self, that self. If I did become aware that I'm assuming the self, then the thoughts would have a whole new dimension in them. They'd become a lot more interesting. So that's a really good way to work with our thoughts, not exchanging one banal, flat, concrete thought for another, not exchanging everything's terrible to everything's great, or I'm going to have a bad time now, I know it, or maybe I'm not going to have a bad time, I might have an okay time, or at least not too bad. So all of that stuff is banal. It's banal because it doesn't partake in reality. It doesn't partake in reality because reality is not made out of concrete categories. Reality is a lot more subtle and multivalent than that. And because reality is a lot more subtle, infinitely more subtle and multivalent than our concrete categories, we don't get trapped in it. There's no literal truths to get trapped in. But as regards the workings of our literal thinking, of the concrete mind, there's plenty of places to get trapped in. And in fact, all of the rational mind's output is a place to get trapped in. All of the rational mind's output is a prison. All of the rational mind's output is the prison of the rational mind. It doesn't really matter what its output is. That's only window dressing. It's like saying, do you want to sell with this type of nice wallpaper or that type of nice wallpaper, or would you prefer just the bare, the classic look, as I like to call it, the bare bricks, just to get the proper feel of a cell, so you know you're in a proper prison cell? Or you could have Persian rugs or silk drapes or whatever. But underneath it all, it's the prison of the rational mind. And the reason that the rational mind is a prison is because it's literal. It doesn't partake in the nature of reality at all. It's closed. It's a closed thing, closed system. And reality is open. All reality is openness. Everything we think is true gives way to something else. Then we realize that what we thought is true, in inverted commas, is only relatively true. So that's the nature of reality. And seeing reality in that way doesn't allow us to actually say anything about it, apart from the fact that we can't say anything about it, but that all appearances give way to other appearances, depending on how subtle we are in our appraisal of them, or in our attention. So the subtler we are, the subtler is the universe in which we live. And if we're not at all subtle, if we're totally governed by the thinking mind, then the universe isn't at all subtle. It's about as subtle as a brick in the face. And about as much fun, really. So subtlety is a great thing. If we could get a bit more subtle in our perception of ourselves and the world, that would be very helpful. It would be very liberating. But we can only become more subtle when we stop relying exclusively on that rusty old machinery of the thinking mind to tell us everything, and when we stop disregarding all the other possibilities we have of perceiving the world. So Ram Dass says the same thing. He says something like, the universe is as high as you are. Doesn't necessarily mean you're off your head on marijuana or LSD or anything. It just means you're not attached to the literal mind. There's a bit of space between us and the literal mind. And the space means that we're not trashing the literal mind or having nothing to do with it, but we realize that the output of the thinking mind is merely the output of the thinking mind, and it can be useful. Sometimes it can't be useful, but at all times it's only relatively true. So there's a bit of space between us and the thinking mind, rather than us being jammed up right against it, kind of stuck to it with super glue. So when we're stuck to the thinking mind as if with super glue, everything it says is absolutely true to us, finally true, concretely true, and we're imprisoned. So that space is a great thing. And that space comes about, we could say, because of radical questioning, or we could say it comes about because of consciousness. Because consciousness, even though that's a kind of a hard thing to talk about in any meaningful way, but we could say consciousness is kind of something like when we're paying attention in an interested way, without any agenda. So if we're paying attention in an interested way with an agenda, as soon as we get our agenda fulfilled, we stop paying attention. So really we're not seeing anything else but our own agenda. So really that isn't consciousness. That's just what Carlos Castaneda calls self-reflection. We just get our own ideas and preconceptions reflected right back at us. So we get trapped. I get trapped between my preconception and the universe's confirmation of my preconception. There's nowhere to go from there. And seeing as how my preconception isn't real in the first place, there's nowhere to go, and I'm not even in a real place. So that's the thinking mind all over. So it can be seen that whatever the hell we call it, radical questioning, which, as I've just said, we could say that is where I'm genuinely interested in the world around me without an agenda, and that includes myself. And that's a very nice, simple thing. Children do it the whole time without even trying, especially without trying. If you tried, we'd mess it up. Such a simple thing to be interested in the world around us without an agenda. And when that happens to be the case, the world is definitely a marvelous place. It opens up and opens up and opens up, and it never stops opening up. It would only stop opening up when our agenda was met, and then we'd stick there. But if we had an agenda, it wouldn't be opening up at all, really. So maybe I shouldn't put it like that. So what limits us are our preconceptions or our assumptions or our ideas or our agenda, what we want, what we're trying to get out of a situation. So if we weren't so greedy the whole time trying to get something out of the situation, we wouldn't be so stuck in a limited concrete reality. Like in a kind of a way, we think it's good to be greedy. We don't think it's good to be greedy, but we act as if we think it's good to be greedy because we think if we're greedy, then we can get what we're greedy for, and then we think that's great, that's good. Because if I get what I'm greedy for, obviously if I'm greedy for it, it must be good, and if I get it, that must be super good. So that's the type of logic we're operating on. And we really are operating on that type of logic once we become adults. Because as adults, we're always trying to stay in control of the situation. We're always kind of manipulating, even though we don't realize we are. We're always playing games. And the thing about trying to stay in control of the situation, which people have always said it's a good thing, take control of your life, people say. Well, people, you see it anyway on the internet, a kind of whatever you'd call it, an inspirational type thing, take control of your life. I mean, there really never was a bigger piece of bullshit than that, really. So if we're controlling, that means we want something. We would never control unless we wanted something, and that means we're greedy for something, and that means we're limited. We're limited by what we're greedy for. There's two possible limits there. One is where we get what we're greedy for, then we get euphoric, and it's like, yay, I'm a winner. It's great. This is so great. Or when I don't get what I want, and then it's the upside down version of that. And I'm very pissed off and very grumpy and very demoralized, and it's terrible. Now both of those limits are the same thing, really. They're both concrete categories, they're both thoughts, they're both the thinking mind, they're both the concrete self. So we're stuck between concrete self getting what it wants and being euphoric, and the concrete self not getting what it wants and being down in the dumps and being a total miserable bastard. So there's nowhere to go there, really. Where'd you go from there? The margin between the two is very narrow indeed. So it's kind of a crappy place to be, and it's not even a real place because the concrete self is not partaking in reality. It's a thought. It's a literal thought. It's a black and white thought. Thoughts don't partake in reality. They try to describe it, and they kind of collapse reality into a label or a judgment or an evaluation. which means that they're actually a limit. They're a limit to reality, a limit beyond which we cannot imagine that there can be anything beyond it. It's a kind of a limit, I guess. And yet when we're living within our limits that we put on reality, we're not living in reality, because reality doesn't have limits. And that sounds like a bit of a facile, inspirational type thing you might read on Facebook or something. But even so, it's true. So our huge emphasis on controlling is really a huge emphasis on us staying imprisoned in the thinking mind, or the limited world created by the thinking mind, which means that if I try to fix myself via some rational therapy, I'm controlling. That's what it's all about. It's all about controlling. That's all the mind can ever do, is control. And that means that's another way to ensure that I stay a prisoner within the realm of the known, which is a very narrow realm. It's the realm which pertains to the unreal concrete self. It's the projection of the unreal concrete self, which is the unreal concrete self. There's nothing else in the picture, really. There's certainly no reality in it, so that makes it a rather dire place to be. So then that brings us back to radical questioning. And the thing about radical questioning is, it sounds like simple enough really, but the thing about radical questioning is we don't really want to ask that question, and we'll go to great pains not to ask it. And we might have a bad reaction if someone else asks it, or asks us it. So the whole thing about controlling in general, as I was saying, that when we're controlling, we want something, and we're always controlling. So what is it we want? What is it that we want? And what we want is essentially to find out that this mind-created identity, this mind-created idea of myself, or sense of myself, really exists. So that's the bottom line. That's what I want, and that's why I'm greedy. I'm greedy for that outcome. And that's why I can never stop controlling. Because unless I control continuously to make sure I get that outcome, that I find that the outcome is that I find that I do exist as this concrete sense of self, then that's bad news. That's what I don't want. So I have to keep on controlling because of that, because I don't want to find out anything else. So no matter what else I might think I'm doing with my rational, purposeful behavior, the bottom line is that's what I'm trying to do, is confirm the reality of the concrete identity. So that's the very reason I don't want to do any radical questioning. Because if that's what I want, to confirm the concrete identity, I'd have to be totally crazy to start radical questioning. Because that's the one thing that's guaranteed to blow this secure sense of being the concrete identity. That's the one thing that is guaranteed to blow that clear out of the water. So obviously, in the general run of things, I'm not going to be at all interested in that. Okay, thanks for watching.